For a moment, I want you to think about your own bluffing strategy. Do you tend to bluff too often or bluff too rarely? For most players, they're nowhere close to perfect, it's one or the other, but it's oftentimes based upon the spot. Some spots they tend to over-bluff, other spots they tend to under-bluff, and if you don't really understand this, you can find yourself very, very unbalanced, especially on rivers, very, very quickly. So today we're going to talk about bluffing through the context of natural and unnatural bluffs. Let's get into it. Good morning, how are we doing today? My name is James Sweeney, aka Split Suit, and today we're going to talk about bluffing. And we're going to look at bluffing specifically through the lens of natural and unnatural bluff selection, and think about this especially in terms of the river, since rivers can be very, very costly when it comes to mistakes, and we really want to make sure that we have our bluffing strategy dialed in, particularly when we get to the river. Now, just to make sure that this is very clear, when we're talking about things like choosing a correct bluffing strategy and making sure that we have proper balance in our overall strategy, even in a betting range on the river, it's very important to understand that when we're talking about that, we're talking about playing against someone else who can think. If our opponent is a complete fish, a complete drooler, then it doesn't make much sense to put stock into how often we're bluffing at a specific frequency, since our opponent doesn't care about that and is going to make decisions based upon other factors, likely how strong their own hand is, rather than thinking about things like your range. And when they're not thinking about that, balanced play is not very important. Now, assuming that your opponent can think a bit and you do think that balanced play is important when it comes to selecting a river bluffing strategy, it's just generally important to understand that humans tend to bluff more than they're supposed to in some spots. We call that over-bluffing, and they tend to bluff less than they're supposed to in other spots, so we can call that under-bluffing. And this concept of over or under-bluffing can oftentimes be wrapped around how many natural or unnatural bluffs are available. So let's define those terms real quickly if you've never heard them before. So a natural bluff is one that's a fairly obvious candidate as a bluff. It's usually some type of busted draw with very little showdown value, and we're going to have a lot of natural bluffs in spots where numerous draws brick by the river. And if we fire all of our bluffs at those scenarios, well, we're typically going to be over-bluffing. Now, on the other hand, in situations where the turn and river cards complete most of our available draws, we're going to have a reduced number of natural bluffs in our range, and we're going to have to find some, quote, unnatural bluffs, which we can consider bluffs with showdown value, such as pairs. Otherwise, we run the risk of massively under-bluffing in these spots. So even if you think about your own strategy, you probably find that you bluff a lot when you have natural bluff combos, and you probably under-bluff situations where there's a lot of unnatural bluff combos, since a lot of players just tend to check the showdown value type hands instead of firing them as bluffs, and that's totally natural, but it's also something that you want to avoid falling into the trap of, since you could easily start under-bluffing situations where the draws or the overall runout really completes and kind of, quote, hits everything. So since many players tend to struggle the most with unnatural bluffs, I think it's helpful to go through an example together. So let's take a situation where we're on the button, we open, big blind defends, we see bet the flop on ace 10-9, we see bet the turn on a 7, and the river is a jack of diamonds, they check, and again, we're thinking about betting. And when we're thinking about bluffing here, it's really, really important to understand that air combos, bluffs, are pretty difficult to come by in this spot, since of course the jack of diamonds fills up pretty much everything. All those draws pretty much got there. I mean, really, think about the hands that you would bet with on the flop and the turn. What if those actually completely brick by this particular river, right? It's probably pretty hard to think of that many, simply because, again, everything gets there. I mean, if you really try to dial it in, maybe there's a couple of king X of heart combos, but it can't be king 8, it can't be king queen. I mean, maybe you're looking like king 5, king 3 of hearts, so those and maybe some extra trashy hands that the solver likes firing, like queen 3 of spades and 5-4 of spades. So we might exploitatively decide not to include those hands in our turn range anyway, so they might actually not even be there on the river. So again, we don't really have a tremendous amount of river bluffing combos available given this particular runout. Of course, there are plenty of worse problems to have than connecting hard with the runout, but we could easily end up with a value-heavy betting range here if we're not careful. As a rough guide, if we were to fire every single air hand in our range, we'd probably only be bluffing about 20%, and possibly even less if we don't barrel the turn with solver-approved trash. Which means that in order to get to a bluff-to-value ratio that's actually correct, we're going to have to find some unnatural bluffs, aka turning some of those pairs into bluffs in order to approach the correct bluffing frequency. If we bluff the majority of the time with our 9x, 7x, and any lower pocket pair kind of hands, we will generate a reasonable bluff-to-value ratio, which is a pretty good start. Now, when we have a pair of 10s or higher, those still have showdown value and shouldn't really be bluffed, although the expectation of bluffing of the 10x hand will still be positive, the EV is typically a big blind or more less than the EV of checking. Thus, bluffing is an EV mistake even if it's not a directly losing play. So depending on the situation, we do occasionally see stronger pairs being turned into bluffs. Again, more of those unnatural bluffs and even stronger than just the bottom, weaker, under pair, mid pair kind of hands. But this usually occurs only if they have exceptional blocking effects. So for instance, if we were to run this through a solver, what we'd actually find is that there are 0 10x or jack x bluffs in our model. However, there are ace king offsuit, ace queen offsuit, and ace 6 offsuit combos in the all-in range, but that's assuming that one of the hole cards is specifically the ace of diamonds. The blocking effect here is actually so significant that the defender will be folding 7 to 9% more often when the aggressor holds the ace of diamonds, depending on the size of the river bluff. Now, despite the exceptional blocking effects in this situation, when you have ace king or ace queen off with the ace of diamonds, it's still mostly a check from the solver, roughly 65% checking frequency. And the fact that both options are employed by the solver means that the EV of the bet and the check must be identical. That's just simply the way mixing within a solver works. After all, the favorable blocking effects also increase the EV of the overall check. Now in real time, if you were really able to discern that, hey, the ace of diamonds, king of spades is a great bluffing combination, honestly, give yourself a round of applause. Awesome for you. But even if you completely miss this combination, you can still easily get close to the correct bluffing frequency without any real noticeable EV loss. So in general, when we're talking about unnatural bluffs, it's probably safer, at least as a general rule, to stick to bluffing the mid and low pairs unless we have a high degree of certainty that our stronger bluff is actually correct. We run the risk of routinely sacrificing 1 to 2 big blinds in EV if we're bluffing with the incorrect showdown value hands, so keep that in mind when you're trying to figure out which kind of combinations you should turn into bluffs, again when pretty much everything gets there and you might not have a tremendous amount of bluff combos to draw from. Now we could expand this video and go on and on, look at tons of examples, look at more spots not just with unnatural bluffs but also natural bluffs. But if you want more and more on that, I would highly suggest checking out my book GTO Gems 2. A lot of this material from this video comes directly from that book, and there's tons of other examples, gems, not just on river bluffing, but also everything leading up to it, from pre-flop play to flop and turn play to bluffing to value betting to sizing. All of these things are wrapped in there and really focus on balance and making sure that you have a GTO understanding, so when you come to try to craft your own strategy, you understand, hey, how does the GTO lineup actually work? How does things compare against exploitative? And then of course you can start crafting your actual strategy from there. Again, the name of the book is GTO Poker Gems 2. Look for it on Amazon if you want the paperback, or visit gtogems.com/2 to pick up your copy today. But hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you have any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. Of course, a thumbs up on the video would be massively appreciated. And if you're looking for what to watch next and you want to go deeper into GTO, watch that video right up there. I'll see you over there shortly. In the meantime, good luck out there and happy grinding.